To the aristocracy of 1882 London, Amelia Clare was a ghost in a muddy brown dress. She spent her youth perfecting the art of being entirely invisible. What society didn't know, what her cruel guardians didn't suspect, was that the ruthless Duke of Rothford had been secretly obsessed with her for 8 long years. The ballroom at the Grosvenor estate on Park Lane was a sea of glittering jewels, imported orchids, and the finest silks from the House of Worth. Amidst the swirling kaleidoscope of sapphire, emerald, and crimson, Amelia Clare was a deliberate stain of puce. She stood behind a massive potted fern, her posture rigidly slouched, clutching a lukewarm cup of punch. Her gown was a masterclass in atrocious tailoring, a heavy, lifeless brownish-purple taffeta that drowned her natural curves, complete with a neckline that managed to be both suffocatingly high and terribly unflattering. Her golden blonde hair, which naturally fell in cascading waves, was ruthlessly scraped back into a severe, agonizingly tight bun, and a pair of thick, wire-rimmed spectacles sat heavily on her nose. Amelia did not need the spectacles. She wore them because they obscured the striking, vivid violet of her eyes. She had not always been the spinster of Mayfair, but survival in the household of her uncle, Lord Thomas Sterling, required a complete erasure of her true self. When Amelia's parents perished in a tragic ferry accident off the coast of Calais when she was 14, her vast inheritance, the Clare shipping fortune, fell into a legal trust managed by Lord Sterling. The stipulations were draconian, but typical for the era. Thomas retained full control of the capital and its massive dividends until Amelia either married a man of his explicit choosing or turned 25. If she remained unwed or married without consent, Thomas kept the money. Lord Sterling and his stunning, viciously ambitious daughter, Lady Genevieve, had spent the last 8 years ensuring Amelia never caught a gentleman's eye. Any suitor who showed even a flicker of interest in the wealthy orphan was quietly threatened, bribed, or fed scandalous rumors by Thomas. But Amelia, highly intelligent and fiercely observant, had quickly realized that drawing her uncle's ire was dangerous. To protect herself from his psychological torment and physical isolation, she actively participated in her own ruin. She dressed to be invisible. If no one looked at her, Genevieve could shine. Uncle Thomas felt secure, and Amelia was left in peace to read, observe, and plan for the day she turned 25. Look at her, larking like a gargoyle in the foliage. A hushed, cruel voice drifted through the fern leaves. It was Genevieve, her voice dripping with venom, speaking to a gaggle of debutantes. Father insists we bring her out of charity, but honestly, she brings down the aesthetic of the entire Grosvenor ball. Amelia took a slow, calming breath, shrinking further into the shadows. Let them whisper. She only had to survive 3 more years. Suddenly, a shift in the atmosphere rippled across the ballroom. The string quartet faltered on a note. The murmurs died down, replaced by a charged, palpable silence. Roland Pendleton, the Duke of Rothford, had arrived. He was a man carved from marble and shadow, standing at a towering 6'3" with raven-black hair and eyes like chipped flint. He was notoriously reclusive, fabulously wealthy, and ruthlessly uncompromising in Parliament. He rarely attended society functions, famously dismissing the marriage mart as a market of vapid pleasantries. Half the mothers in London were terrified of him. The other half were desperate to marry their daughters to him. Genevieve immediately adjusted her décolletage, stepping into the center of the room, painting on a dazzling smile. As the Duke descended the grand staircase, his gaze swept over the crowd with chilling indifference. Lord Sterling rushed forward, dragging Genevieve by the elbow, bowing low. "Your Grace." "An unexpected honor," Thomas simpered. "May I present my daughter, Lady Genevieve?" Roland barely paused. His flinty eyes flicked over Genevieve's flawless face with the same emotional attachment one might give a moderately interesting doorknob. "Lord Sterling," he murmured, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that sent shivers down the spines of eavesdroppers. "Excuse me. I am looking for someone." He bypassed the most beautiful woman in London without a second glance. Amelia pressed herself flat against the flocked wallpaper. She prayed to every deity she knew that the shadows would swallow her whole. But Roland's gaze, sharp as a hawk's, cut through the crowd, past the dancing couples, past the glittering chandeliers, and locked directly onto the potted fern. He didn't walk, he stalked. The crowd naturally parted for him, sensing the singular, predatory focus radiating from the Duke. Amelia felt her breath catch in her throat as he approached the dim alcove. "Your Grace," Amelia squeaked, dropping into a hasty, clumsy curtsy, purposely letting her spectacles slide down her nose. You have wandered into the foliage." Roland stopped inches from her. The scent of him sandalwood, clean linen, and cold rain enveloped her. For a terrifying second, he didn't speak. He simply looked down at her, his eyes tracing the severe line of her hair, the hideous puce fabric, the smudged glass of her spectacles. Then, slowly, a muscle ticked in his jaw. Without a word, he reached out a gloved hand. Amelia flinched, but he bypassed her face, his long fingers gently plucking a dying frond from the fern beside her head. "A tragedy. What society demands we wear to survive, isn't it, Miss Clare?" he murmured, his voice so low that only she could hear it. Amelia froze. Her heart hammered wildly against her ribs. "He knows my name." Before she could formulate a stammering reply, Roland leaned in a fraction of an inch closer. "That color is a crime against your complexion, Amelia. But even covered in mud and glass, you could never hide from me." He slipped a small folded piece of thick vellum into the pocket of her drab gown, bowed with mocking perfection, and turned on his heel, walking back into the glittering throng as if the interaction had never happened. Amelia stood paralyzed, her fingers trembling as they brushed the stiff paper hidden in her pocket. The ghost had been seen. Amelia waited until she was securely locked inside her freezing, drafty bedchamber at the Sterling townhouse on Mount Street before she dared to breathe. She lit a single tallow candle. Her uncle forbade beeswax in her quarters, citing frivolous expense, and pulled the vellum from her pocket. The handwriting was bold, aggressive, and elegant. "The Apple Orchard at Chatsworth House. Summer, 1874. I have not forgotten the girl who fell from the branches, nor the promise I made her. Tomorrow, 3 p.m. The rare book section of Hatchard's, Piccadilly, A." The letter slipped from Amelia's numb fingers, fluttering to the floorboards. A memory, repressed for nearly a decade to spare herself the agony of loss, hit her with the force of a physical blow. 8 years ago, she had been a wild, joyous 14-year-old, spending a month at the Duke of Devonshire's estate with her parents. Roland had been 20, a newly titled Earl, grieving the sudden loss of his own father, burdened by a title he hadn't yet grown into. She had been climbing a massive oak to rescue a stray kitten, and had tumbled directly onto the brooding young lord sitting beneath it. Instead of scolding her, Roland had laughed a rare, genuine sound. For 3 weeks they had been inseparable. She had read him poetry. He had taught her how to play chess. On the night before she left for Paris with her parents, a young Roland had taken her hands and promised, "When you are old enough, Amelia, I will find you. Do not let the world dull your fire." 2 weeks later, the carriage accident in Calais took her parents. The fire was extinguished. Amelia was swallowed by her uncle's greed. For years, she had watched the society papers, seeing Roland rise to become the formidable Duke of Rothford. She assumed she had been nothing but a childhood diversion to him. She had been wrong. The next afternoon, heavily cloaked and risking her uncle's wrath, Amelia slipped out of the townhouse and made her way to Hatchard's bookshop. She found Roland in the dusty, quiet back aisles, pretending to examine a first edition of Keats. "You came," he said, not looking up from the book, though the tension in his broad shoulders eased. "You are insane," Amelia whispered fiercely, pulling her hood down slightly. "If my uncle's spies see me speaking to you, he will lock me in the attic. Or worse, ship me off to my spinster aunt in Yorkshire." Roland closed the book with a sharp snap. He turned to her, his flinty eyes burning with an intensity that made her knees weak. Let him try. I have spent the last 4 years untangling the labyrinth of offshore accounts and shell companies your uncle used to embezzle your fortune. I needed undeniable proof before I could legally strip him of his guardianship without ruining your reputation in the courts. Amelia stared at him, stunned. You have been investigating Uncle Thomas? I have been watching over you, Roland corrected softly, closing the distance between them. I saw what you did, Amelia. I saw you don those hideous dresses and hide your brilliance just to survive him. It tore me apart to let you stay in that house. But the law gave him absolute power until I had the evidence. I wrote to you, over 50 letters. I never received a single one. Amelia choked out, tears of betrayal springing to her violet eyes. I know, Roland said grimly. I realized a year ago he was intercepting them. That was when I realized playing by society's rules would not work. The financial trap is set, Amelia. The solicitors have the documents. Tomorrow night is the midsummer masquerade at my estate. You will attend. At midnight, I will announce our betrothal, and your uncle will be served with a warrant for fraud simultaneously. You will never return to Mount Street. It sounded like a fairy tale. It sounded like salvation. But they had underestimated the sheer, desperate paranoia of Lord Thomas Sterling. When Amelia returned to Mount Street, the atmosphere in the house was deadly silent. As she stepped into the foyer, 2 burly footmen immediately seized her arms. Her heart dropped into her stomach. Standing at the top of the stairs, holding the heavy wool cloak Amelia had worn to the Grosvenor ball, was Genevieve. Her beautiful face was contorted into an ugly sneer. In her hand was a crumpled piece of vellum, Roland's first note, which Amelia had foolishly left tucked beneath her mattress. A secret rendezvous? Genevieve mocked, descending the stairs slowly. With the Duke of Rothford? You sneaky, pathetic little rat. Lord Sterling emerged from his study, his face purple with rage. He held a thick stack of letters tied in a faded blue ribbon. Roland's letters. Did you really think, Thomas hissed, spit flying from his lips, that I would let a fortune of £2 million slip through my fingers because some arrogant duke took pity on an ugly duckling? They are mine, Amelia screamed, struggling violently against the footman. Give them to me! Thomas laughed harshly and tossed the bundle of letters straight into the roaring fireplace in the sitting room. Amelia watched in absolute horror as 8 years of Roland's unspoken love curled into black ash. You are a liability, Amelia, Thomas said coldly, adjusting his cuffs. I knew Rothford was digging into my affairs, but I didn't realize his motive was romantic, a minor miscalculation, one that will be rectified tonight. You cannot keep me here, Amelia spat, dropping the timid facade, her violet eyes flashing with a terrifying, untamed fury that mirrored her 14-year-old self. Roland will come for me. He will come to a masquerade expecting a bride. Thomas smiled cruelly. But you will be halfway to the Scottish Highlands. My cousin operates a highly discreet, highly secure asylum for women suffering from hysterical delusions. By the time Rothford realizes you are gone, you will be a heavily medicated ghost in a padded cell. And as your medical proxy, your funds will remain entirely in my control. Take her to her room, Thomas barked at the footman. Board the windows. The private carriage arrives at 3 a.m. If she screams, gag her. Amelia was dragged up the stairs, fighting like a wildcat, her screams echoing off the mahogany walls. She was thrown onto the bare floorboards of her freezing room, the heavy oak door slamming shut. The horrifying sound of a deadbolt locking, followed by the screeching of nails being driven into wood, sealed her fate. It was 8 p.m. In 7 hours, the carriage would take her to a living death, and Roland, miles away, would be putting on a mask, completely unaware that his invisible girl was about to disappear forever. The grand-grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 10 times. Its low, resonant tolls vibrated through the floorboards of Amelia's freezing bedchamber, 5 hours until the carriage arrived to take her to the Highlands. 5 hours until she ceased to exist in the eyes of the world. Amelia sat on the edge of her bare mattress, her breath pluming in the frigid air. She was not weeping. The 14-year-old girl who had lost her parents had wept. The 22-year-old woman who had spent 8 years surviving Lord Thomas Sterling was coldly, ruthlessly calculating. Her uncle had boarded the windows and deadbolted the heavy oak door, but his arrogance had blinded him to the architecture of his own home. The Mount Street townhouse had been built in the previous century, designed with a labyrinth of concealed servant passages that the current, wealthy inhabitants completely ignored. Behind the massive, heavy mahogany wardrobe lay a narrow access door used by chambermaids 50 years prior to clear the fireplace ashes without disturbing the gentry. Amelia stood up. The hideous puce dress weighed her down like armor, but she needed her strength. She pressed her shoulder against the side of the wardrobe, her boots finding purchase on a knot in the floorboards. Gritting her teeth, she pushed. The heavy wood shrieked in protest, sliding a mere 2 inches. It was agonizing work. Her muscles burned and her hands bruised, but the adrenaline of sheer survival fueled her. After 20 minutes of silent, grueling labor, the gap was just wide enough. She squeezed behind the wardrobe, her fingers finding the rusted iron latch of the servant's door. It was stiff, fused with decades of paint and neglect. Amelia reached into the severe bun at the nape of her neck, extracting a thick steel hairpin. With practiced precision, a skill she had learned from a scullery maid, years ago, she worked the pin into the mechanism. Click. The door yielded, opening into a pitch-black, narrow corridor smelling of dust and old soot. Amelia did not hesitate. She slipped inside, navigating the dark shaft entirely by touch, climbing the steep, winding servant stairs upward rather than downward. She could not leave the house looking like a spinster. If she arrived at Harrington House in her muddy brown taffeta, the footman would throw her into the street before she ever reached the ballroom. She emerged into the cavernous, drafty attic. This was the graveyard of the Sterling household, filled with discarded furniture and forgotten trunks. But Amelia knew exactly what she was looking for. Tucked beneath a canvas tarp in the furthest corner was a brass-bound steamer trunk, stamped with the letters C.K. Clementine Clare, her mother. With trembling hands, Amelia threw open the lid. The scent of dried lavender and faint rosewater drifted up, bringing a sudden, violent lump to her throat. She pushed aside velvet cloaks and riding habits until her fingers brushed something impossibly soft. She pulled it out into the pale moonlight filtering through the skylight. It was a Parisian masquerade gown of midnight blue silk, overlaid with delicate silver lace that shimmered like starlight on a dark ocean. It was scandalous, breathtaking, and utterly rebellious. Beneath it lay a matching silver filigree half-mask. Amelia stripped off the puce dress, letting the heavy, oppressive fabric fall to the dusty floor like a shed skin. She stepped into the midnight silk. The gown fit her perfectly, hugging the curves she had spent 8 years hiding, the neckline sweeping low to reveal her collarbones. She pulled the tight, agonizing pins from her hair, shaking her head as a cascade of heavy, golden blonde waves tumbled down her back and over her shoulders. Finally, she took the thick, wire-rimmed spectacles from her face, dropped them onto the floorboards, and crushed the glass beneath the heel of her boot. The ghost was dead. The heiress had returned. Wrapping herself in a heavy, fur-lined winter cloak to hide the gown, Amelia descended the servant stairs all the way to the cellar. She slipped past the slumbering kitchen boy and exited through the coal chute door into the rain-slicked alleyway behind Mount Street. It was nearing 11 o'clock. The London rain was relentless, but she paid it no mind. She ran through the shadows of Berkeley Square until she reached the main thoroughfare, waving down a passing hansom cab. Harrington House, Clare, Amelia told the driver, a grizzled man named John Cobb. She pulled a diamond and pearl earring from her cloak pocket, one of her mother's hidden treasures, and pressed it into his palm. "And if you get me there before midnight, you shall have the pair." Cobb's eyes widened at the jewel. He tipped his hat violently, cracked his whip, and the carriage surged forward into the stormy night. Miles away, the midsummer masquerade at Harrington House was a spectacle of unparalleled opulence. 1,000 beeswax candles illuminated the massive ballroom, reflecting off the diamond-draped necks of London's elite. A string quartet played a frantic Strauss waltz, but Roland Pendleton, the Duke of Rothford, felt nothing but a rising, suffocating dread. Dressed in stark, unrelenting black, wearing a predatory raven mask, Roland stood at the top of the grand staircase, his flinty eyes scanning the sea of colorful, masked guests. It was 11:30. Amelia was not here. His solicitor, Mr. Alistair Covington, stood discreetly by the marble pillar, clutching a leather briefcase containing the warrants and the financial ledgers from Coutts & Co. Bank. Nearby, blending into the shadows, was Inspector Charles Harriman of Scotland Yard. The trap was set. All Roland needed was his queen. Suddenly, the crowd near the entrance parted. Lord Thomas Sterling and Lady Genevieve entered. Genevieve was dressed as Marie Antoinette, draped in obscene amounts of pink satin and powdered hair, while Thomas wore the mask of a Roman senator. Roland's heart slammed against his ribs. Amelia was not with them. He descended the stairs like a hunting panther, intercepting Thomas before the man could even grab a glass of champagne. Lord Sterling, Roland's voice was a lethal, quiet rasp. "Where is your niece?" Thomas arranged his features into a mask of profound, tragic sorrow. "Your Grace, it is a terrible tragedy. Amelia was taken violently ill this evening. Brain fever. The physician's suspects. She became utterly delirious, speaking to people who were not there. For her own safety, she is resting quietly at home under heavy sedation." Roland stared at the older man, his jaw ticking so hard he thought his teeth might shatter. Brain fever. It was the classic cowardly excuse of the aristocracy when they wanted to lock an inconvenient woman away. Thomas had found out. "Is that so?" Roland murmured, stepping so close to Thomas that the older man physically recoiled. How remarkably convenient. Roland turned sharply, signaling Mr. Covington and Inspector Harriman. He did not care about the scandal anymore. He was going to ride to Mount Street, tear the doors off their hinges, and drag Thomas Sterling through the mud of Hyde Park. "Gentlemen," Roland commanded, his voice ringing with absolute authority, "bring the carriage around. We are going to—" "Your Grace," the head footman's voice bellowed over the music, striking the room like a thunderclap. The string quartet faltered. The hundreds of guests turned toward the massive mahogany double doors. "Miss Amelia Clare." The silence that fell over the ballroom was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating quiet, broken only by the crackle of the hearth fires and the soft, collective intake of breath from the London elite. Standing in the archway, framed by the golden light of the hall, was a vision that made society momentarily forget how to speak. She wore no powdered wig, no suffocating corset, and absolutely no puce. She was draped in midnight blue and silver, the silk clinging to her figure like liquid night. Her golden hair was a wild, untamed halo cascading down her back, and beneath the silver filigree mask, her striking, vivid violet eyes blazed with the fury of a surviving queen. Genevieve dropped her crystal champagne flute. It shattered against the marble floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot, but no one looked at her. Roland stopped dead in his tracks. The breath was punched from his lungs. For 8 years, he had loved the brilliant, hidden mind of the girl in the muddy brown dresses. But seeing her now, stripped of her camouflage, radiant and fiercely alive, he felt a profound, overwhelming awe. He had promised not to let the world dull her fire. Looking at her, he realized she had never needed his protection to keep burning. She had simply been waiting for the right moment to set the world ablaze. Lord Thomas Sterling's face drained of all color, shifting from pale to a sickly, mottled gray. "No," he whispered, stepping backward. "No, this is impossible. She is locked, she is unwell. Amelia did not look at her uncle. She walked straight down the center of the ballroom, the crowd parting for her as if she were royalty. She never broke eye contact with Roland. Roland closed the distance between them, stripping his raven mask from his face. He stopped inches from her, his chest heaving. He reached out, his gloved fingers trembling slightly as they brushed a damp strand of golden hair from her cheek. "You are late, Miss Clare," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I had an issue with my wardrobe." "Your Grace," Amelia replied, a devastating, brilliant smile breaking across her face. "I found I had nothing suitable for a disappearing act." "Amelia!" Lord Sterling roared, finally snapping out of his shock. He lunged forward, his face contorted with rage, abandoning all aristocratic decorum. "You ungrateful wretch! You are delirious. Gentlemen, my niece is suffering from a violent hysterical episode. I must insist." Before Thomas's hand could grasp Amelia's bare arm, Roland moved. It was blindingly fast. The Duke grabbed Thomas by the lapels of his evening coat, lifting the older man nearly off his feet, and threw him violently backward. Thomas crashed into a table of hors d'oeuvres, sending silver platters clattering to the floor. "Do not touch her," Roland snarled, his voice a terrifying feral rumble that echoed through the cavernous room. "If you ever attempt to lay a hand on my fiancé again, I will not bother with the courts. I will ruin you myself." The ballroom erupted into a frenzy of gasps and frantic whispers. "Fiancé?" Genevieve rushed to her father's side, her face flushed with humiliation. "Roland, you cannot be serious. She is a mousy little freak. She has nothing." "She has the entire Clare shipping empire, Lady Genevieve." A calm, authoritative voice interrupted. Mr. Alistair Covington stepped into the light, adjusting his spectacles. He opened his leather briefcase, pulling out a thick, leather-bound ledger. "Or she would, had your father not been systematically siphoning her dividends into a fraudulent tin mining scheme in Cornwall for the last 6 years. Thomas scrambled to his feet, his eyes darting wildly toward the exits. "Slander! Lies! You have no proof." As her legal guardian, under the Larceny Act of 1861, embezzlement by a trustee is a severe criminal offense, Inspector Harriman announced. Stepping out of the shadows, flanked by 2 uniformed Metropolitan Police officers, "We have the bank records from Coutts and Co., Lord Sterling, hand-signed by you. Furthermore, we have a sworn affidavit from your carriage driver regarding your intent to forcibly confine Miss Clare to an unregistered asylum tonight." Thomas opened his mouth, but no words came out. The trap had not just snapped shut, it had obliterated him. The high society he had worshipped, the peers he had sought to impress, were staring at him with undisguised disgust. "Lord Thomas Sterling," Inspector Harriman said coldly, producing a pair of heavy iron handcuffs, "you are under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit false imprisonment. Take him away." As the officers dragged a sobbing, protesting Thomas out of the ballroom, and Genevieve fled in a torrent of humiliated tears, the string quartet, entirely unsure of what to do, awkwardly began to play a soft waltz. The murmuring crowd faded into the background as Roland turned back to Amelia. He reached up and gently untied the ribbons of her silver mask, letting it fall to the floor. He stared into her violet eyes, the eyes he had searched for in every crowded room for nearly a decade. "The financial trap was elegant, Roland," Amelia said softly, her hands coming up to rest against the solid warmth of his chest. "But I must admit, I prefer my own method of escaping." Roland let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her flush against him, not caring that half of London was watching. "You climbed out of a locked, boarded room on the night of a storm, didn't you?" "I am the girl who fell from the oak tree," Amelia reminded him, leaning up into his space, her breath mingling with his. "You told me never to let the world dull my fire." "And you never did," Roland murmured, lowering his head. "I loved the girl in the tree, Amelia. I loved the ghost in the puce dress, and I am entirely at the mercy of the woman standing before me now. When the Duke of Rothford kissed Amelia Clare in the middle of Harrington House, it was not a polite, aristocratic peck. It was a promise, a reclamation, and a fiery declaration of victory. The invisible girl had finally been seen, and the man who had watched her in the shadows had finally stepped into the light. The 8-year wait was over, and their reign had just begun. Did you gasp at Amelia's daring escape, or cheer when the Duke finally took down her cruel uncle? The 8-year wait was agonizing, but their midnight victory was absolute perfection. If you loved this historical tale of hidden brilliance, dramatic twists, and undeniable romance, hit that like button. Share this story with a fellow romance lover, and don't forget to subscribe for more epic, real-life inspired storytelling.